I hope you will not shy away from sharing that story, how
Well,
way back when you worked as a male stripper.
well, do you think that story is appropriate for this?
I think that people need to understand that life is life. We go through things that we need to go through.
You don't have any children who?
This is this is not for children.
Okay, all right.
Don, there is a saying that men always want to be first to women, but women want to be last to men. There's that saying in Latvian. Is there a similar saying in English?
I've heard that saying. I didn't know it was Latvian. It's a similar idea. I understand it.
So I don't know if that's humorous, but we are going to talk about humor today. Don McNeil, I wish I could say that you are the first to me on this podcast, but unfortunately, you are the second man. Welcome on the She Became CEO podcast.
I'm happy to be here.
Don, on the show, I inspire people to become CEOs of their voices, their businesses, and their lives. And if I am correct, you are in the public speaking business, are you?
Correct.
And
I,
you are a humor speaker, aren't you?
for the most part, if people don't laugh, then I'll take it that I'm a serious speaker.
You know, when I was first in the United States, which was, oh my goodness, more than 30 years ago, I saw a show, a humorous show, one of those shows where they play laughter after people speak. And it felt so annoying to me. But now I understand because sometimes I don't understand humor, and it helps me to know when to laugh.
Well, laugh tracks have their place. That's for sure. Because that started because people sitting home watching television, it really encourages them to laugh. And especially if you happen to be alone, you could laugh with the audience. Otherwise, it's tough to laugh if you're by yourself.
I can laugh by myself, though. I can sometimes laugh out loud. But Don, tell me your thoughts as a professional humor speaker. Are women funny?
I've competed against women in speech contests. Uh, I've heard you, Ilse, I've heard you give humorous speeches. I just don't see a whole lot of difference. Traditionally, most humorous speakers are men, but then that's because women didn't have the opportunities. But now that the playing field is level, I really don't see any advantage that men have over women as far as humorous speaking. If there is an advantage, I don't see it.
And who are your favorite humorous speakers or comedians?
Uh, Way back when, Gracie Allen, she was married to George Burns. And I think when they were partners, he was only funny because of her. In fact, he often said that he was starving and then he met Gracie and he never worked another day in his life because she created his career with her humor and she could do the straight lines that allowed him to be funny.
Hmm.
And before he had her, he was just an average comedian.
And how about you? Would you say humor comes naturally to you, or is it hard work?
I wouldn't say it's hard work. Uh, I I personally think if you tell the truth in your humor, that people can relate to that. Uh, I usually, if I hear someone, if I hear a comedian, and I pretty much know that everything they're saying is made up, I don't tend to buy into the humor. But if I know they're telling genuine stories, then to me it's much funnier if I think it's genuine.
You mentioned some speakers, and you said way back when, and you were talking as if about the past. But presently, who do you watch, if anybody?
Well, a lot of the speakers I think of are Toastmasters.
Mm.
A lot of the funniest people are Toastmasters. Ilse, you've told a lot of funny and serious speeches. Um, but I can think of a lot of people. Sandy Campbell, certainly. There are several people in Raleigh Talkmasters and the Bedford Club, especially, who were extremely funny. I hate to name names because I'll leave people out and then I'll feel guilty the rest of the day. But but to me, the women are every bit as funny as the men. I just don't see any difference. But they're funniest when they're making fun of men. My wife is hilarious
Yes.
when she talks about me, but she would never give a speech in public. So I'm the only one who knows how funny she can be.
It was things that I thought it might be tricky. I would tell him what I would write down aisle 3 down at the bottom on the right hand side. So that's how bad it kind of was. Well, this time I made a grocery list and I wanted a whole chicken because I wanted, and they never have a whole chicken cut up in the grocery store. So I told him, I said, I want a whole chicken. I said, they're in the back of the back where they sell chicken breasts, chicken legs, chicken parts. I said, that's where you'll find it, a whole chicken. Then I want you to take it to the butcher and have them cut it up in 8 pieces. Well, the reason was I wanted to freeze it 4 pieces for making chicken and rice and 4 for making chicken pastry. And I was going to separate it and freeze it. So I explained it to him again. Then take it to the butcher in 8 parts, but I don't want the insides. So he comes home with all the groceries, and I know there's always something missing or something that's wrong. But I've learned to accept that because he at least tries. So I look for the chicken, and I see a rotisserie chicken. And I said, Don, what's this about? He said, oh, I thought I'd buy the rotisserie chicken so you wouldn't have to cook. I thought, did you take it to the butcher and ask him to cut up this rotisserie chicken? I said, where did you miss having the chicken cut up in 8 parts? So anyway, there went my chicken and dumplings and my chicken and rice, and we had a rotisserie chicken so I wouldn't have to cook.
But I was thinking of you.
He was thinking of me.
But
wasn't his fault.
Carol, can you tell the story like how Don also doesn't understand about the protecting the house? Phillips and Maddie didn't hear it.
Do what?
About like if somebody invades the house.
Oh, yeah, your plan. Tell us
Yeah.
about
A
your plan.
recording of it.
Well, we were talking about terror attacks and things like that a while ago, and I said that I had the perfect plan, and we would use a fan in our bedroom, and we can't hear anything. So somebody, to get it, if they got through the front door, we wouldn't hear them. If they got to the bedroom door, they would see us, probably. And so I told Don, I said, the thing to do, I have this little black thing that you just press and the light comes on. You can't even see it. So I told him, if somebody breaks in, I will get out of bed with that little light. I won't turn it on because I know exactly where to go. I'm going to grab the phone. I'm going to hide in the attic. I said, but what you can't do is wait. When you wake up surprised, don't say, where's my wife? Because then they're going to know I'm in the house and they're going to look for me and they'll find me and they'll kill me and they'll kill you too. So the thing is for him not to say anything about me. And he's the only person in the house who's, I'm down in the attic with the little light calling 911. I'm taking care of the situation.
But you don't want him to get a gun, right? Why? And can you explain why?
Well, if he says, where's my wife, then they'll know I'm in the house and they'll go find me. But if he doesn't say, where's my wife, then they won't think anyone's in the house but him.
Yeah, right.
And
But
so they'll just take him.
That's noble of you to sacrifice yourself.
Oh, yeah, if they've taken you out, I don't need the gun.
Worst case scenario,
The main thing
sacrifice
is,
yourself.
the main thing is just don't say, "Where's my wife?"
No matter what else
No
happens,
matter what
don't
else
involve her.
happens.
That's all that
I'm
matters.
letting you out.
Don't say
I'm
that.
taking care of it.
Don't say that. What if I say, where's Carol?
Then they'll know someone's in the house, and they'll tell the other person, "Go find her."
Don't kill me. I still haven't found a wife.
You know,
And you're still in bed like this while they're looking for me, and I've already gotten through 911, and they're on their way.
have any of the women here ever sent a man with a grocery list? With a list?
It wasn't groceries.
You are not the only one. I was going to mention Carolyn, and she really is funny. But Don, what do you think about speaking from the stages and giving humorous speeches from stages, and then using humor in everyday conversations and even conversations like these, like on podcasts? Is that the same skill, or is that a different skill in your
Well,
opinion?
for me, stories I tell on stage come from private life. And I always, I try to write down when things happen that I think are funny. I don't always do that, but most of the stories I tell, I don't think I've ever told a story that wasn't true. And I think audiences understand that these are true stories. Um, when I tell stories about things that my wife says to me, they're all true.
Yeah.
They're all true. She could be in the audience listening, and she couldn't say, "No, I never said that." They're always what she said, the way she said it. Because for me, that's the only way it's funny.
Yeah.
If it's true.
I guess that's how you know that the stories that I've been telling that are funny are actually true.
Yeah.
Yeah, taken from the life. So even though it's risky to give a speech or try to reuse the humor that you've shared from stages, as we discussed before we started recording this conversation, I would like you to share some of those speeches. And would you agree to share one of those stories about your wife, Carolyn?
Sure. When I joined Toastmasters in 2012, it was right after I retired from American Airlines. I worked for American Airlines for 39 years, and I worked long hours, 6, 7 days a week, almost never took off work. And then suddenly I retired, and I did what I would advise no one else to do. I retired without a plan. I had no retirement plan. So I went from working all the time to being retired. My third day of being home, Carolyn said, "You can't just hang around the house. You have to find other things to do," because I was interfering with what she wanted to do. I was in the way. And I'll never forget the third day I was retired, I was listening for the mailman. When I heard the mail truck, I said, "Oh, I'm going to go get the mail." And then I realized, wait a minute, I went from being as busy as anybody could be to being a guy sitting in the house listening for the mail truck. And that's no good. So Carolyn said, "You need outside activities." She was right. So one of the things I decided to do, I had no experience as a Toastmaster, never been to a meeting, but I thought, well, I'll at least pretend that I'm trying that just to make Carolyn happy. So I went to a Toastmasters meeting and I didn't speak. I went to the second meeting and didn't speak. About halfway through the third meeting, a man named Steve Rosenberg turned around and he said, "You can't just sit here." And I thought, well, that's right. If I'm going to be here, I have to put in some effort. So I started giving speeches. And I hadn't been a member very long. And a man named Bill Davis said, "You should get into the humorous speech contest." And I didn't want to do that, but I couldn't think of an excuse not to. And I liked Bill so much. So I said, oh, okay. But now I was stuck. I had to do it. So in the contest that year, there were 4 people. I came in 4th out of 4 people, but at least I showed up. About a week after that contest was over, I overheard my wife, Carolyn, talking to 2 of our grandkids, Ben and Caroline. And Carolyn said, yeah, your Papa Don was in a speech contest and he came in last. I hated that. I hated for my grandkids, even though it was true. I hated for them to hear that I came in last, but it was my own fault that I didn't try. So I made up my mind I would put effort into it. So the next year, when the contest rolled around, I thought of an incident from my life that was true, and I practiced telling that story. It was about when I was employee of the month at McDonald's in June of 1968. So I practiced that story. I entered the contest, and I came in first in the club contest. Then I won the area contest. I won the division contest, and I went all over the state practicing that speech. And the best memory I have of that is when I practiced at the Lamplighters Club in Wilmington. I practiced my speech, and when I was done, a member of that club came over, and when he knew no one else was listening, he said, "Is that your speech?" I said, "Yeah, that's my speech." He said, "I feel sorry for you. You're going to be humiliated." I said, "Well, it's the best I can do. So it'll have to be good enough." Well, 2 months later, they had the state championship, the state contest in uh, Greensboro, and I won first place. And that man from Wilmington who told me I'd be humiliated, he walked up to me after they gave me the trophy. He said, "Boy, do I look like an ass." I said, "Oh," I said, "Don't worry about it. I mean, you never know who's going to win." But my wife, Carolyn, wasn't there for the contest. She was taking care of her mom. So I walked out to the lobby and I called Carolyn and I said, "The contest is over." She said, "What happened?" I said, "I won." And there was a long silence and I waited for her to answer. And finally she said, "Oh, Lord." Because from her point of view, I'm never going to hear the end of this. And she knew I'd bring home a trophy, and she hates that. She hates, to her, it's clutter. It's just clutter. You know, you can win the Nobel Peace Prize, and my wife would think it's clutter. She wouldn't want it in the house. So I won the contest that year. And then not long after that, I decided, well, maybe I could start Mark Twain speaking because I'm from Missouri. I was a fan of Mark Twain's writing and speaking from the time I was 8 years old when we went to Hannibal and I, toured his house and all that. And I thought, well, why not give it a try? But I'd always had short hair, and no facial hair. So I wanted to try it. I practiced the speeches, but I had to have a mustache. I had never had a mustache. So I bought this fake mustache. I got it through the mail uh, from a theatrical supply company in Sacramento. I paid a lot of money for it. And Carolyn would glue it on my upper lip before I went out to speak. And it was working okay, I guess. But then one night I was speaking at a Masons meeting, and there were about 100 men there. It's a men's club. And I spoke for almost an hour. And at the end of the hour, I could feel the mustache start to slip. And I thought, if this mustache falls off in front of this audience, I'll never recover. I'll never recover from that. But it held on. The next morning, our granddaughter Caroline was at our house. And I told her what had happened. And she saw the mustache, in the baggie. And she said, "Where did that mustache come from?" And I told her the story. She said, "What's it made out of?" I said, "It's guaranteed to be 100% human hair." And then she said, "Human hair from where?" And after that, I could never, never let that thing touch my face again because I don't know where that hair came from. So you've heard the old expression, sometimes the answer is right under your nose. So the next day I stopped shaving. And within about 6 weeks, I had a decent mustache and it came in gray like Mark Twain's mustache. So I couldn't have been any luckier as far as the mustache. Uh, this one I hope can't fall off, but I've gotten used to it. I can't even imagine not having a mustache now. But there was an incident where when I first started giving Mark Twain speeches, I was speaking at a senior center. And when I finished, this elderly woman asked me to come closer to her. And then she asked me to bend over. I thought she was going to whisper something. When I bent over, she grabbed the mustache and yanked on it as hard as she could. And when it didn't come off, she looked at her friend. She says, "Gladys, I told you. I told you it's real." Um, that's the only time that ever happened. But and I've been talking so long, I don't even know what the question was.
Don't you already transitioned? I was going to ask you about Mark Twain, and this is really your niche that you are known for. You impersonate Mark Twain. So, how long have you been doing that?
Since 2014.
Since 2014, that's about 12 years. And how did you come up with that idea?
Well, I was born into it. I'm from St. Louis. I was reading Mark Twain books when I was 8 years old. I spent what little money I had buying his books. And this is the thing I'm going to tell you that a lot of people just find hard to believe, but it's true. Instead of standing in front of a mirror pretending I was a baseball player, when I was a child, I would stand in front of a mirror and tell Mark Twain stories
Mhm.
in front of a mirror. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I actually did that. And I memorized as much as you can most of his best known stories. And I can still tell them today. Um, one thing I would say is nobody can impersonate Mark Twain. I perform as Mark Twain. The reason no one can impersonate him is we don't have any recordings of his voice. And that's good and it's bad. It's good because people would be trying to speak exactly like him, and that would be awfully tough because from accounts from his mother, from his brother, everyone who heard him speak, he spoke with such an extended drawl. People think I speak slowly. I probably speak twice as fast as Mark Twain spoke. His drawl was so long, people sometimes thought he was drunk because the drawl was so extended. Uh, his mom called it Sammy's long talk because he didn't speak like anyone else in his family. His mom said he sounded nothing like her, his father, or his brother. He was totally different from everyone else in the family. How that happens, uh, who can explain it? But his mother said it, so it must be true.
Oh, that is such a fascinating story. And I didn't know that about you, that as a boy, you were looking into the mirror and imagining yourself as Mark Twain. But your efforts, or so to say, your childhood dream has been recognized because recently you received the Mark Twain Remembrance Award of 2024. Please share with my audience the process of how they pick the candidates and how they actually select the winner.
Well, thank you for asking that. It's a group of, they're all women. It's a committee of women in Hannibal, Missouri. And they review videos and they do in-person visits to listen to people who perform as Mark Twain. I didn't know it, but they came and heard me speak twice. Once in Hilton Head, South Carolina. I gave a speech there in front of about 300 people, and they were there. So they heard me speak that time. And the second time, they came all the way to Cary, North Carolina, and they heard me speak at an event there. After that event, there were some women there who approached me and asked me some questions, and I didn't know that was the committee. They wanted me to answer their questions without knowing who they were. And they asked me about some of his famous quotes, and I answered the questions, and based on seeing interviews, videos with me, but mostly from hearing me speak in person, they said I was the most authentic Mark Twain performer in the United States. And these women helped to write the Mark Twain biography at the University of California, Berkeley. So they are the premier Mark Twain scholars in the United States. And they weren't going for who's the funniest, who draws the biggest crowd, who sounds the most like the actual Mark Twain. That's their only goal. And it was an honor that they picked me. So thank you for asking that.
I have chills just listening. That is a great honor.
Oh, yeah.
What an achievement, Don. That's amazing. Do you think it would be a good place and space and time for you to share maybe some pieces from your Mark Twain's performance right now?
Well, sure. Well, the classic story, of course, is the watermelon story. When Mark Twain spoke, everyone had to hear the watermelon story. It just had to be. But he told the story I feel funny with the headset on. But when I was no more than 8 years old, I remember a day, a hot summer day, when a farmer pulled his horse-drawn cart through our little village. The cart was full of the most beautiful watermelons I had ever seen in my life. And I wanted one, but the watermelons were 2 cents each, and I didn't have 2 cents. So I waited until the farmer was busy talking to a customer, and I ran behind his cart. And I grabbed one of the watermelons and then ran behind the lumber yard to enjoy it. But when I broke it over my knee, I realized it was a green watermelon. I was immediately sorry that I stole that kind of a watermelon. And I wondered, what's the right thing to do? And I thought about my mother. My mother always told me, when in doubt, think about George Washington. What would George Washington do? And that was the answer. George Washington would seek restitution. So I gathered up the watermelon, what was left of it. I carried it back out and put it on the farmer's cart. And then I walked around to talk to him. And when I spoke to him, I said, how dare you sell this kind of watermelon to an unsuspecting public? You know which ones are bad. We don't. That's your business. Well, that man stopped to think. And soon he said, you're right. You're right. I'll never sell another bad watermelon again for the rest of my life if I have to starve for it. Now you all see what I did. You can all see it. I was only 8 years old, and I turned that man's life around. He was a sinking ship, and I turned his life around. And I was only 8 years old. I was already showing adults how to live a moral life. And what did I get out of it? He gave me a free watermelon. That's the way Mark Twain told the story.
It's so funny. And I have heard this story several times from you, but now listening to it again, I was thinking, what is it in Mark Twain's stories that fascinated you so much? And I'm thinking, because I have heard you share stories about your father, do you think Mark Twain's demeanor somewhat resembled your father's demeanor, or maybe vice versa? Because you have funny stories about your dad as well.
My dad was a good storyteller, and he was very funny, but he could laugh while he told the story. Mark Twain didn't do that. He told the story deadpan with a straight face. And some people have a problem understanding that it's supposed to be funny because he tells it like he's demanding that you believe it, no matter how ridiculous it might be. But my dad was a good storyteller, that's for sure. Whether or not he would have wanted to tell stories the way Mark Twain did, I'm not sure. He had a very sarcastic sense of humor, though. Mark Twain did also.
And I think that he was a storyteller, but he also acted funny. Can you share, if you will, also a story or a few about your father.
A story about my dad that I always think about is the time that he received a letter from the IRS. And back in the 50s, that was a more serious thing than it is today. People are going to prison right and left for owing small amounts of money. And nobody where I'm from could hire a lawyer. So you just threw yourself on the mercy of the court. So the letter said that he had to report to the IRS office in downtown St. Louis to answer questions. My mom was really scared, thinking he was going to jail. But my dad looked at me and he said, I'm going to take you out of school and I'll take you down there with me. So we went to the IRS office. We had to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning. And this is long before computers were invented. So the IRS office was maybe 90 to 100 men, each sitting behind a small wooden desk with a tray of pencils on one side and tax forms on the other. And we sat there until one of those men called my dad's name. So we went and sat down, and the man was just what you'd expect of an IRS agent back then, kind of a small, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. He's looking down at the paperwork. And my dad said, could I ask you a question? And the man said, just wait. I'll get with you in a minute. Oh my gosh, I thought this isn't going to go well. So finally, the agent looked at my dad and he said, Mr. McNeil, the reason you're here is that you should have claimed at least another $300 on your taxes. My dad said, what? He said, you understated your income by at least $300. You had a part-time job tending bar at the university club. People get good tips there. You should have claimed at least $300 more in income. And my dad said, what are you saying? He says, well, you should have claimed at least $300 more. And when he said that, my dad leaned forward and put his arm on the man's desk. And he said, are you saying I should have made $300 more? Well, in a way, my dad jumped out of his seat, thrust his arm out toward the agent, who tried to back up out of the way, but he didn't have rollers on his chair, so he couldn't get out of the way in time. My dad grabbed his right hand, started shaking it, started pumping the man's hand, and my dad, with tears in his eyes, said, I can't thank you enough. I cannot thank you enough. I've never had anybody help me the way you're helping me. My dad said, I thought they were cheating me out of money, but I would have never known if I didn't talk to you. And the agent said, oh, Mr. McNeil, that's not what I'm saying. Don't you understand what I'm saying? My dad said, I understand exactly what you're saying. Well, then the agent looked around and he realized that everybody around us had stopped what they were doing and they were staring at my dad because of this performance. And the man said, no, 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 that's not what I'm saying. My dad says, I understand what you're saying. Write it down on your stationery. Take a piece of your stationery, write this down and sign it. I'm going to take it down there right now and shove it under their noses and demand my $300. The man says, but Mr. McNeil, I don't think you understand. My dad said, yes, I do. I understand what you've done for me. No one's ever helped me the way that you're helping me. You have no idea how much this extra $300 is going to help my family. I can barely feed my kids. And he pointed to me. That's when I realized why I was there. And he said, I cannot thank you enough. And the man stopped and he thought, and he said, look, Mr. McNeil, this is all just a big mistake. If you'll go home, I promise you won't hear any more about this. Well, at that point, my dad had totally defeated the guy. It was a complete victory, but my dad wasn't going to let him go that easy. So my dad said, go home. Well, what about my $300? The man said, Mr. McNeil, I'm sorry. There is no $300. Then my dad reached out, and as he was shaking his hand again, he said, it's not your fault. You tried to help me, and I'll never forget how kind you were to me. And then he turned around and we walked out. When we got in the car, my dad looked at me. He said, that's how you handle people like that.
That was, I think, the life lesson. And I know that you have picked up some of those tricks, I think, from your dad. And the one trick that I remember Carolyn, your wife, shared, which I said I might share or not with my audience, was where she was talking about you going to vote to the voting center. Uh, and that is a similar story to the story that made me laugh to tears at a very sad moment when our friend had just passed, or he was very sick. You sometimes trick people too. Would you share the Padre story and make me laugh again?
Well, a few years ago, I'm a very curious person, and I like to experience what other people experience, just to see what that's like. And I decided one day to visit a Catholic church. I'm not Catholic, but I respect all religions, and I just wanted to learn. So I went, and it's a very large Catholic church in Raleigh. And I would say there were a few hundred people there. And the audience was in a big circle. And down on the ground, there was, the priest and the choir and guitar players and all that. So I'm just sitting there listening to what's going on. And then they were going to take, what's the word?
Sacrament?
Communion.
Communion.
They were going to take communion. So people were going to go down where the priest was. And several people, as they're edging their way past me, said, aren't you going to go down for communion? I said, no, I think I'll just stay here. So I sat there. It took a long time. And I got so tired, I closed my eyes. And when my eyes were shut, I felt someone like sit down next to me and nudge me just a little bit. And I turned, and it was the priest. People who heard me say I wasn't going to get up, they thought I couldn't get up. They went down and told the priest that man up there can't get up. So what a wonderful man. He came all the way up there to give me communion by sitting next to me. He said, I'm going to give you communion So I didn't feel good about it, but I thought I have to do this. So I did it. And he said, "Bless you." And I said, "Thank you, Padre." Now, why in that moment I called the priest a Padre, I'll never know. But when I told the story, my friend Ilse thought that made the story a lot funnier, that I used the word Padre, and maybe she's right. But that's not the end of the story. So people were looking at me, smiling. Like I felt like I had 300 people looking at me, all smiling. It was such a special moment for the whole church that the priest did this for somebody who couldn't stand. So when everything was over, I sat and I thought, I'm going to be the last person to walk out of here because I don't want anything else to happen. So I sat, and finally I hear a voice say, "Here we are, sir." And I looked over, and at the end of the aisle, there were two young men with a wheelchair to help me out of the church. So I stood up, and I'm not proud of this. I'm not proud of this. But in that moment, because they had a wheelchair, I felt like I had to go along with what they thought. So I held the seat in front of me and used that as support and staggered over to the wheelchair and sat down. They pushed me out to the parking lot. "Where's your car?" I told them. They pushed me over to my car, helped me stand up. So now I'm leaning against the car. "Are you okay?" I said, "Yes, thank you. I'm fine now." And they left. It's not a story I'm proud of, but it happened. And it's a true story. I went home and told my wife about that. And she rolled her eyes and she said, "That could only happen to you." So um,
That
that
can
was the day I
only.
took communion as a Baptist. Now, some people might hear that story and say, you know, you should be embarrassed. And maybe they're right. I don't know. But I certainly never planned any of it. But but it happened. So
Um, I will share something with you that I haven't shared with anyone. Maybe 10 years ago or so, I wanted my parents to come over to this country to visit me. But my parents don't understand English well. My mom knows some sentences, but not much, not enough to get through the airports. And I was very worried. How could they fly to see me and get through the airports? Because there's no straight flight from Riga to Raleigh at the time. And my idea was to call the airport and ask for a wheelchair and say they are old people and they cannot walk. And I knew that those people who push wheelchairs, they would definitely get them from gate to gate to gate. But when I called the airport, they said that it had to be ordered certain amount of time in advance. So it didn't work. And I was very, very worried. But when I saw my parents, actually, there was a storm. Oh, there was, I think, a strike. And they had to change flights to actually get here. And when they finally appeared, at the airport, they looked all so fresh and bright and said hello. And I was so proud of my parents. And I was not proud of myself for thinking that they would not get through all the hustle, all the airports, and get to the final destination. So yeah, that's my story. Yeah.
I think I would have done the same thing. You were just taking care of your parents.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me. And you were providing work for the people who push the wheelchairs.
There
You
you
were
go.
you were providing employment and maybe extra income.
But
Who
you
knows?
know a
Someone might have
lot.
gotten laid off without you.
Yeah, true. But you know a lot about airports because, like you said, you worked for American Airlines and you have stories about those times as well. The one time was how they tested you. Would you like to share one of those stories?
Um, I was the crew chief for American Airlines. So I was in charge of all the people who worked on the ramp. And I'd been doing it for a long, long time. And one day, a new supervisor was hired. And of course, technically, he was my boss. Technically. So his name was Kevin. And I remember one day we had 7 airplanes. They were all going to land about the same time. And we only had enough crews to work 3 or 4. So it was going to take a lot of maneuvering to try to get all this done. So I'm standing out on the ramp waiting for that first flight to land. And Kevin walks out. Okay, when the London flight lands, how are we going to handle that? So instead of telling him, don't worry about it, I know how to do this. I was very polite, very respectful. I said, okay, Kevin, here's my plan. So I went through my plan. As I'm talking to him, I could see one of those planes land. And it came up and it was at the end of the yellow line waiting for someone to park it. Nobody parked it. He said, what about the Miami flight? How are we going to handle that? I said, okay, here's how we'll do that. And as I'm talking, another plane, another plane, and another plane. Now there are four airplanes all waiting for someone to bring them into the gate. All the employees are standing doing nothing. No one's doing a thing. So Kevin kept asking me questions. And finally he turned around and he said, why are all the employees standing around? No one's doing anything. What's going on? I said, Kevin, they're all waiting for me to tell them what to do. They're waiting for my instructions. Why don't you tell them what to do? I said, Kevin, you're my boss. I'll stand here all day and explain to you how the airport works, if that's what you want. I said, I'm not going to raise my voice. I'm not going to be disrespectful. I said, I'll stand here all day and tell you how this works, or I can go ahead and do my job. I said, it's your choice. He said, well, what should I do? I said, why don't you go to your office, answer the phone? There's probably some paperwork you could be doing. Why don't you go to your office and do that? Okay. And he put his head down and walked away. But that's what I always did. There were some crew chiefs, if a supervisor questioned them, they'd get mad and start yelling and even cussing. No, I never did that. I'd stand there all day if that's what they wanted until they finally realized themselves that they're totally screwing up the whole operation by standing there. And to me, it just works better. Instead of getting excited and saying things you might regret, that's how I did it. I didn't know anyone else who did it that way. Everyone else would get all excited, wave their arms around. I could never see doing that. But I knew that if a lot of the airplanes got delayed, he would have to answer for it. Because when I was questioned, I would say, I was talking to Kevin. That's why all the flights got delayed. Because I was talking to him. So then
Right.
he'd have to answer for it. In fact, that happened one time. The
Right.
supervisor got called in the office for talking to me while I was supposed to be working. And the general manager knew what I did, and I just stopped working to talk. And I don't know, it made sense to me.
And Don, but you said that you retired from American Airlines to become the public speaker, but American Airlines has not been your only job. You have another story, and I hope you will not shy away from sharing that story. How
Well,
way back when you worked as a male stripper.
well, do you think that story is appropriate for this?
I think that people need to understand that life is life. We go through things that we need to go through.
You don't have any children who?
This is this is not for children.
Okay, all right. Well, when I was in college, I was uh, I was an average student, no more than average. And as an average student, I would have gotten by just fine. But I was also working full time at the same time. And I wasn't smart enough to do both full time. So my grades were suffering. So one day I went to the university employment office and I told a very nice man there what my problem was. I said, I have to support myself, but I can't work this many hours. And he talked about it. He said, there's one job that I'm aware of, but I'm going to tell you this off the record. And this is not connected with the university. I said, I understand. He said, have you thought about becoming a stripper? I said, a male stripper? He said, yes. He said, you might be qualified to do this. You won't have to work as many hours. Uh, you'll have more time to study. And he said, I think your income will go up. I said, well, if it gets me through college, I have to give it a try. Now, I know what people think when they hear me say this. How could this guy have been a male stripper? But that's because they're looking at me the way I look now. You have to use your imagination. Imagine me at age 20 and a half. I was 6'2" and a half. I was in superb physical condition. I really was, lifting weights almost every day. The last time I took a physical, I was 6 foot and half an inch. So in all those years, I've lost a full 2 inches. And we all know that size matters. So I've lost 2 inches. So I worked hard at it. And I did become very efficient. And a lot of customers, I have to say, especially female customers, although there were some men, but mostly the female customers could not stop praising the work I did. Now, it's hard to do on a podcast, of course, but I can tell you that the tool I preferred for stripping is the Purdy 6-in-1 stripper. And I prefer to use it at about a 45-degree angle. Taller men use less of an angle, shorter men, obviously more of an angle. But I was one of the best at stripping. The other thing about stripping that's important is the touch. I had a very light touch. What does that mean? If you don't have a light touch as a stripper, you can potentially damage wood underneath the paint you're trying to strip off. I was so proficient, I helped strip the home of Ulysses S. Grant in St. Louis County. And I was on the cover of Stripper magazine in August of 1971. And I'm very proud of that. You can probably still pull up that issue on the internet. And there I am as a stripper of the month. So that's my stripper story. And I'm very proud of it. Now, if some of your audience was thinking something else, Ilse, that's on them. That's on them. And they should be ashamed of themselves if that's what they were thinking.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Don McNeil, humorous speaker. But Don, you give not only humorous speeches, you also give heartfelt and serious speeches. And we were talking about which of those speeches are favorite to you. And to me, I really like a couple of stories. I don't know if you would be willing to share the story about your grandson, Jacob.
My grandson Jacob is was adopted by our daughter-in-law. He's from Haiti, and so Jacob was an orphan in one of the poorest countries on earth. So you could maybe say he was one of the poorest people on earth. He was adopted by our daughter-in-law, Alyssa. And we were there, Carol and I were there at the airport when Alyssa brought him here, and he became part of the family. And a story I can share is how Jacob, because he didn't understand disliking people or being rude to people, or he had none of that in him. And when he was a tiny, tiny boy, not long in this country, my wife and I took him to a Baskin Robbins donut shop or a restaurant. And he had the orange ball in his hand that I gave him at the airport. That orange ball was important because it's the first thing he owned when he came to America. The orphans in Haiti own nothing. The toys they have are in a box they have to share. They don't really understand the idea of ownership. So now he's got this orange ball, and that was his. So we took him to Baskin Robbins, and we're sitting there in a booth, and he's playing with his orange ball. I noticed in a nearby booth, there was a man, probably about my age, sitting there really giving us dirty looks. It was just obvious, giving us dirty looks. And it was upsetting to me. Of course, Jacob didn't notice. My wife noticed and I did. And I wondered, what was he thinking? Was Jacob making too much noise and disturbing him? Was he upset that two white senior citizens had a black child? He was upset about something. Well, as it happened, Jacob was playing with his ball. Ball rolled off the table, and it just had to happen. The ball rolled over and stopped right at that man's feet. And I thought, oh no. So Jacob jumped down and ran over there, and the man still had that hard look on his face. And Jacob reached down and grabbed his ball and then looked straight up at the man who was staring down at him. And suddenly, unexpectedly, Jacob's fist shot up toward the man's face. And I thought, oh my God, what's going to happen? And then the man looked down at Jacob, and a big smile came over his face. And he reached down and he gave Jacob a fist bump. And Jacob had changed that man's attitude just with the kindness of a fist bump. Well, everything was different. The man was smiling, he was laughing. The whole time Jacob was there. And I knew then this was just a lonely man. Maybe he didn't have anyone in his life. Maybe his wife had passed away. He was just lonely. And Jacob had changed that completely for him. And when we got up to leave, the man was waving and smiling at Jacob. I drove around the building and stopped on the other side, right at that window where the man was sitting. And when he looked up, Jacob waved at him. And without any doubt, I saw that man wipe away a tear. He was complete, he was so happy that that had happened to him that day. And it's something I'll never forget because as an adult, I'm sometimes trained to think the worst of people, even though I fight against it. I fight against it, I really do. But sometimes I'm as guilty as anyone of thinking bad things about other people. But Jacob, that wasn't even in his mind that this could be a bad person. This was just another person to give him a fist bump. And that's what happened. So that's a story that makes me really emotional because I can, as I tell the story, I can go back to that day and think about that man. Um, at least he had a friend for that day. So I'm sure that meant a lot to him.
Yeah.
So
As I was listening, I had tears coming, creeping into my eyes, and I have heard that story and I can listen to it over and over. It's one of my favorites.
well, well, it's. I take it as uh, it was a lesson learned by me. It
Yeah.
wasn't just a moment where that man had a reason to be happy. It was something that I had to internalize and make it so that I wouldn't do that again. Think the worst of someone just because of a look they had on their face. So I'm not saying I'm still guilty of it, but I try because of the lesson Jacob taught me.
And I think that everybody can relate to it because we all have wounds and our brains protect us from previous suffering, so to say, or just meeting people who are not kind. And
Yeah,
that's just the job
yeah,
of the part of our brains to protect us. And I agree, it's the child's innocence can teach us a lot. How about the Christmas story? Is it a good time for it to be shared, or is it too long?
um, there's a story that I've been thinking about this week, and if you'd allow me to tell, this is Thanksgiving week,
Yeah.
and the person who I always think of when I think of Thanksgiving is a woman who my wife and I knew who lived in Greensboro. Her name was Minnie. Her her birth name was Minnie Macchioni. And if you're thinking that's Italian, you're right. And we became very good friends. She was my mother-in-law's next door neighbor. And Minnie practiced gratefulness more than anyone I've met in my life. Minnie didn't want to own anything that she didn't have to have. I can remember my wife and I wanted to buy her a toaster. She said, no. I said, they don't cost very much. Let us buy you a toaster, because she was heating bread in the oven. She said, it's not the money. She said, everything that you own owns you too. So I thought, oh God, that's a good life lesson. So she said, there's one thing you could do for me. You could take me to run errands about once every other month. So I was happy to do that. And one Wednesday, I went to her apartment at 9 o'clock in the morning, and she had a white index card with the errands that she had to run. And the first was to the bank, and she had to do something with her will and have it notarized. The second errand was to take her to the dentist. And they took x-rays of her teeth. And we ended up in the dentist's office, and he's looking at his screen. And Minnie was sitting behind him, and I was behind Minnie. And he said, Minnie, you're not doing a good enough job taking care of your teeth. And Minnie said, Doctor, I'm 98 years old. He said, it doesn't matter. Your teeth should last as long as you do. Well, Minnie didn't like that answer, and I could kind of see her fist clench up. And finally, Minnie said, Doctor, how old are you? He said, 43. Why? She said, well, I notice you're losing your hair in the back. Shouldn't your hair last as long as you do? And he said, okay, Minnie, I get it. I won't say that anymore. So the next stop was the Social Security office. Minnie showed me a letter they sent her, asking her to go down for an interview. So we were taken into a private office, and this man said, Minnie, can you explain why the name you've used all your life isn't your birth certificate name? And she said, yes. She said, when I was in first grade, the first day of class, the teacher called out the names. And she said, Winona Macchioni. I said, no, teacher, that's wrong. My name's Minnie. And I was so convincing that she marked out Winona and printed Minnie, and that became my name.
Hmm.
And my parents were okay with it. So then she said, but why did you want me to come down here? He said, well, because of 9/11, anyone who changes their name and there's no explanation, we're supposed to ask. But he said, let me ask you a question. I'm 98 years old. If I was going to be a terrorist, wouldn't I have done something before now? He said, yes, of course. He said, I'm sorry. It's just something we have to do. That was the end of the errands. Then we went to the Cracker Barrel. That's the only place Minnie would eat out. She sat down, she ordered chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes with brown gravy, and corn. She fixed her utensils and her napkin and was ready. When the food came, Minnie picked up her knife and fork, and then suddenly, unexpectedly, she slammed down her knife and fork on the table And she looked at me and she said, "You took me to lunch. How lucky am I?"
Mm.
And that was Minnie. I've never met anybody who practiced gratefulness the way Minnie did. She was grateful for everything in her life. She lived to within 3 months of her 100th birthday.
Mm.
And I always think it's because of how she lived and because of how she thought.
Mm.
She never lived in a nursing home, lived by herself for 50 years after her husband passed away, never went for physical therapy, never took medication, never even took a vitamin. She was just healthy until
Mm.
she passed at age 99.
Wow.
But I especially think of her every Thanksgiving when people use the word gratefulness. I don't ever expect to meet anybody as grateful as Minnie was about everything.
Mhm.
So, but thank you for letting me tell that story because it's every Thanksgiving, especially at Thanksgiving, I try to remember her.
I was going to ask you to share your favorite story, and thank you for sharing. Ladies and gentlemen, Don McNeil has a wide range of stories. And Don, maybe you share with my audience, who do you speak to? What are your audiences, your ideal audiences, or the audiences that you would like to speak to?
I've done quite a bit of corporate business type speeches, business lunches, that sort of thing. And I enjoy those. One business group I spoke to, they were executives from all over the world. And I'm going to tell this story because something very funny happened. At least I thought it was funny. When I was done speaking, uh, a man from Japan came up and he said, I never knew that Mark Twain was so funny.
Mhm.
And I had my book that I always take. It's a book from the Mark Twain era. It's from, he could have had the book.
Mhm.
It's that old. And he said, "Can I take a picture?" I said, "Certainly." So he picked up the book and took a picture of the book instead of taking a picture of me.
That's so funny.
I thought that was so funny. And he told me he was going to put that on Japanese Facebook. So I wish I could have seen that. Uh, but I've done a lot of speaking at churches. When I started, I loved speaking at senior centers. It was a
Mhm.
great place to practice, rehearse,
Mhm.
and the people, most of them had read the books.
Yeah.
Whereas when you speak to other people, most of them know the books. Maybe they've seen a movie or something, but most people can't say they've read the books.
Mm.
But like my generation, a lot of people, yeah, they've read the books. Uh, and of course, the Toastmaster audiences,
Mhm.
they're the best because
Yeah.
they're the best listeners.
Yes, but
Uh,
I know that you speak for fun, like for Toastmasters, but I know that you also still need to earn money because you are also supporting family members in need. Um, Particularly, I mean, your wife who struggles with mental illness. And I know that you are open and she agrees that you talk about what her struggles are. Could you share a little bit about that?
Certainly, I appreciate you bringing that up. Um, Most people don't talk about mental illness, and for a long time, I didn't either. But my wife and I have decided that it's better to be open about it because it might help other people who have a mental illness, and it might help them, and I think it does. Uh, my wife suffers from severe anxiety, and her life is a world of what ifs. What if the coffee maker doesn't work? What if the TV doesn't work? What if the car breaks down? When you're extremely anxious, your world is a world of what if. And I do the best I can to try to stay positive about how well things are going, uh, and a lot of the times it's helpful. Um, she's gone to a lot of my speeches, a lot of them, and I have to make sure there's a place where she can sit, where she won't feel that anxiety, where she won't have people looking at her. Uh, at one event, they had two chairs set up on the stage, one for me and one for her. And I realized that she didn't want that. She didn't want a chair on stage because then people would be looking at her. So I asked the event organizer, could you move that chair off so she can sit where the other people are sitting? And of course they did that. But that person had no way of understanding uh, what effect that would have on Carolyn sitting like that. Uh, but she's been to a lot of those events, and it almost always works out real well. And the people are they're always nice about it. They always try to accommodate uh, what she needs to feel comfortable. So at another event, they kept us backstage because they understood that as people were arriving, if she had to speak to them, that would make her extremely anxious.
Mm.
So that worked out. That works out real well if she doesn't have to meet people before the event starts. Not that she's not friendly; it just makes her anxious.
Yeah.
So
That's why it means so much to me that when we have met and Carolyn opens up and shares her stories. I remember when she was talking about her and her friend dancing, that warmed my heart because I knew that she felt comfortable in
yeah,
my home. As you get older and I get older, I know that technologies probably are a little bit more difficult for us to get the word out about us being speakers and speaking. To just wrap up this conversation, will you share a story about the technologies, which I call smile story? Do you remember that?
that might be the one story you could tell better than me. Would you mind telling it?
I
I
don't
love the way you tell it.
know. I used to have a phone that would take selfies when I give the order using the word smile. Once Don and I met at a McDonald's restaurant for a coffee. It was early in the morning, and seniors could get free coffee at the time. So we would get there and discuss speeches and just have friendly conversations. And I had an idea that we should take a selfie together. So I sat next to Don and I had a tripod and I set up my phone and pointed it toward us so that we are both in a frame. And I said, smile. And Don, who usually doesn't smile except right now, has a little smile. And I thought that looked nice, but perhaps we need to take another one. Maybe it will turn out even better. And I said, smile. And Don smiles, even makes a bigger smile. And then I gave another order and said, smile. And there was that big smile. And I will try to find that picture, and it wasn't me telling Don to smile, it was me giving orders to my phone so that it would take a selfie. But Don, you have another story about how you were taking selfies before you learned to do it properly.
Well, when I first got the iPhone, I saw people taking selfies and talking about taking selfies, and I didn't know there was a button that you push to take a selfie. I didn't know that existed. So I was taking selfies, trying to guess where the camera, with the phone turned around the wrong way, and I might take a half an hour to get a decent selfie because, and then somebody showed me, one of my grandkids showed me that little button that you push to take a selfie. I thought, oh my gosh, I've been, I wondered why everyone could do it so easily. And it was so difficult for me. But I know. Yeah. I always say with technology, I'm right about where the real Mark Twain was as far as technology. I just, most time I just don't get it. And maybe that's why I love the Mark Twain speaking, because I don't have to use it. Technology doesn't matter. So
But you do have a website and you have an email. So please share with us what the email address is in case people want to book you as a speaker.
the email is d-c mcneil at nc.rr.com. So you'll notice my email is so old, it still has Roadrunner. I don't know anyone else who still has an email that has the RR in it, but it still works.
No worries. Don, I will put all the contacts and those email addresses and URLs in the show notes so that people will be able to find you. You have pictures and you have a video, I think, even on your website, and to hear you speak.
There's my wife and I at one of those events. And Carolyn's got the big smile on her face.
She
That's
does.
a great smile. And she's smiling like that because it's over. It's over. And no one asked her to speak. So, and you notice the dress she has on is Mark Twain era. So she's there as Olivia Twain. At that time, I didn't have to use a cane, but I was in a car accident. So now I need to use a cane.
Mhm.
So, but again, it doesn't take away from what I do.
Yeah. How are you doing? Are you doing better?
Well, I'm doing fine. Yeah, I'm doing fine. As long as I have the cane, I'm good.
Yeah.
I feel blessed that that's all it is.
Well, thank you so much, Don, for taking the time out of your Sunday and joining me for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, don't forget my payment, a cup of coffee or a shot of bourbon at a time of your choosing.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.